Emma Chun stood in the CEO's office holding a photograph that made the most powerful woman in the building start to cry. The truth hidden in that faded image was about to destroy the lie her father had been living for 7 years. And Emma had exactly 1 minute before security arrived to drag her out. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The photograph was old, its edges worn soft from years of careful handling. The colors had faded to that particular sepia tone that only time and love can create. And there was a small crease running diagonally across one corner where it had been folded and unfolded countless times. Emma Chun held it in her small hands as she stood in the doorway of the most intimidating office she had ever seen in her 10 years of life. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird, and her worn sneakers, still damp from the morning rain, squeaked softly against the polished marble floor. She shouldn't be here. Children were absolutely not allowed on the executive floors of Sterling Industries, and the daughter of the night janitor had no business anywhere near the glass and chrome sanctum of Victoria Sterling. The CEO, whose face appeared on the covers of business magazines and whose name was spoken with a mixture of reverence and fear throughout the building. But Emma had waited 3 weeks for this moment, watching her father's cleaning schedule, memorizing the security guard rotations, and planning her approach with the meticulous care of a general preparing for battle. Because the truth she carried in that photograph was worth any risk, any punishment. Victoria Sterling sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than Emma's entire apartment building. She was exactly as imposing as Emma had imagined, dressed in a steel gray suit that matched her eyes, her dark hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. She was reading something on her computer screen with the kind of focused intensity that made the air around her seem to crackle with electricity. Emma had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her mind, but now that she was actually standing here, every word she had prepared evaporated like morning mist. The CEO looked up, and for a moment their eyes met. Emma saw the flash of surprise, then the immediate calculation of a woman whose time was measured in millions of dollars per hour. Victoria's perfectly manicured hand reached for the phone on her desk, no doubt to call security and have this intruder removed. But something made her pause. Perhaps it was the way Emma stood there, trembling but resolute, clutching that photograph like it was the most precious thing in the world. Perhaps it was the tears that were already forming in the little girl's eyes, threatening to spill over. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, some indefinable quality in that moment that made the most powerful woman in the building hesitate. Emma's father, James Chun, had worked at Sterling Industries for 7 years. He started his shift at 11 every night and worked until 7 in the morning, moving through the empty floors like a ghost, erasing the evidence of the day's business with his mop and his cleaning cart. He was invisible to the people who worked there during daylight hours, just another face in a uniform that no one bothered to remember. But James Chun had not always been a janitor. That was the secret Emma carried, the truth that had been locked away in a shoebox in the back of their closet, hidden beneath old tax returns and fading receipts. 3 months ago, Emma had been looking for her birth certificate for a school project when she found the photograph. It showed a young man and a young woman, both probably in their early 20s, standing in front of a small storefront. The sign above them read Chun and Sterling Technology Solutions in proud letters. The young man was her father. That much was immediately clear, though he looked so different then. His face was unlined, his smile was broad and genuine, and his eyes held a spark of ambition and hope that Emma had never seen in the tired man who came home each morning smelling of industrial cleaner and exhaustion. The young woman beside him had her arm linked through his, and she was laughing at something beyond the frame of the photograph. She wore jeans and a simple t-shirt, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. It took Emma several long minutes of staring before she realized who the woman was. Victoria Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Industries, standing beside her father like they were partners, like they were friends, like they were building something together. Emma had confronted her father that night when he came home from work, the photograph clutched in her hand. She had demanded answers, her voice rising with a child's sense of betrayal at being kept in the dark. Why was he cleaning the floors of a company he had helped to create? Why had he never told her about this? Why was Victoria Sterling now a billionaire while they lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where the heat barely worked in winter? Her father had gone very pale, and he had sat down heavily at their small kitchen table. He had asked her where she found the photograph, and when she told him, he had simply stared at it for a long time, his expression unreadable. The story that emerged over the next hour was one of friendship and betrayal, of dreams and devastating loss. James Chun and Victoria Sterling had met in college, 2 brilliant minds in the computer science program who discovered they thought in complementary ways. While Victoria was the visionary who could see market trends and business opportunities, James was the technical genius who could build anything she dreamed up. After graduation, they had pooled their meager savings and started their company in a rented storefront, working 20-hour days, sleeping on the floor, surviving on instant noodles and shared ambition. For 2 years, they had built something remarkable together. A software solution that was genuinely innovative, genuinely revolutionary. And then James's wife, Emma's mother, had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Everything had changed in that moment. The medical bills had been catastrophic, drowning them in debt despite their insurance. James had needed to focus on his dying wife, on being present for the terrifying final months of her life. He had been absent from the company for weeks at a time, and during one of those absences, Victoria had made a decision. She had bought out his share of the company, presenting him with papers to sign while he sat in a hospital waiting room, his mind numb with grief and fear. She had told him it was the best solution, that he clearly couldn't focus on the business. That this way he would have money for the medical bills and she could take the company in the direction it needed to go. In his devastation, he had signed without really reading, without understanding what he was giving away. By the time Emma's mother died 6 months later, Victoria had secured millions in venture capital funding. Sterling Industries was born, and James Chun's name was erased from the story entirely. He had been too broken to fight. Grief had hollowed him out, leaving him a shell of the man he had been. The money from selling his share was gone within a year, consumed by medical debt and funeral costs, and the basic expenses of trying to raise a baby daughter alone. When he had finally emerged from the fog of mourning, the company he had helped build was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and Victoria Sterling was being profiled in Fortune magazine as a self-made success story. He had gotten a lawyer, but the contract he had signed was ironclad. He had no legal claim to anything. He had been outmaneuvered by someone he had once considered his best friend, someone he had trusted implicitly. The betrayal had been more devastating than the financial loss. But here was the thing Emma couldn't understand, the detail that had kept her awake for 3 months. When she had asked her father why he worked at Sterling Industries of all places, why he would clean the floors of the company that should have been partly his, he had given her an answer that made no sense. He had told her it was because he needed to remember. He needed to see every day what he had lost, what he had let slip through his fingers while he was drowning in grief. It was his penance, his punishment, his way of never forgetting that moment of weakness when he had signed away his future. Emma had argued that this was insane, that he should work anywhere else, that seeing Victoria Sterling's success every day must be torture, but her father had just shaken his head with that sad, distant expression he wore so often and told her that some pain was necessary, that some wounds were meant to stay open. Emma had not accepted this explanation. She was 10 years old, and she understood with the absolute moral clarity of childhood that what Victoria Sterling had done was wrong. The woman had taken advantage of her friend's darkest moment, had stolen what rightfully belonged to him, and had built an empire on that theft. And the fact that she walked through the halls of her company every day, never acknowledging the man who mopped her floors, never recognizing the person who had helped her become who she was, made it even worse. It was an erasure, a rewriting of history, and Emma could not let it stand, so she had begun to plan. For 3 weeks, Emma had studied the building's rhythms like a detective working a case. She learned that Tuesday mornings were when Victoria Sterling arrived earliest, often before 7, to prepare for board meeting. She learned that the executive assistant didn't arrive until 8:30, leaving a window of time when the CEO was alone and unguarded. She learned that if she wore her school uniform and carried her backpack, she could slip past the lobby security by walking quickly and purposefully as if she belonged there. Children of employees sometimes came through for special events, so if she looked confident enough, no one would question her presence. And most importantly, she learned that her father took his break at exactly 6:45 every Tuesday, disappearing into the small break room on the 3rd floor to eat the sandwich she ha. This Tuesday morning, Emma had left for school at the usual time, waving goodbye to her father as he prepared to leave after his shift. But instead of walking to the bus stop, she had circled back, hiding in the alley beside their building until she saw him emerge and head toward the parking lot where he kept his ancient rusting car. Then she had run, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, racing to catch the early bus that would take her downtown to the Sterling Industries building. Her plan was insane. She knew that. If her father found out what she was doing, he would be furious. But Emma had inherited his intelligence and his stubbornness, and she had also inherited something from the mother she barely remembered, a sense of justice that burned like a flame in her chest, refusing to be extinguished. Now, standing in Victoria Sterling's office with the photograph in her hands, Emma felt that flame flickering dangerously. The CEO's hand hovered over the phone, and Emma could see the calculation happening behind those cold gray eyes. She needed to speak now before security was called, before this moment of opportunity vanished forever. Her voice came out smaller than she had intended, barely more than a whisper, but it carried clearly in the silent expanse of the office. "Do you remember this?" Emma asked, holding up the photograph with trembling hands. "Do you remember who you used to be?" Victoria Sterling's hand froze. For a long moment, she simply stared at the photograph, and Emma watched as something flickered across the woman's face. It was there and gone in an instant, too fast to identify, but it had been something. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe memory, or perhaps even shame, though Emma couldn't be sure. The CEO's expression settled back into its mask of professional composure, but she lowered her hand from the phone. She stood up slowly, moving around her desk with the deliberate grace of a predator circling prey, and Emma had to fight the urge to step back. "Where did you get that?" Victoria's voice was controlled, but there was an edge to it that Emma hadn't expected. Not anger exactly. Something else. Something that sounded almost like fear. Emma lifted her chin, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "My father kept it. In a box. Hidden away like it was something shameful. like it was something he needed to forget, but he couldn't forget, could he? Because he works here. He cleans your floors every night. James Chun, the man in this picture, the man who helped you build this company, the man you erased. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation, which is exactly what they were meant to be. Emma watched Victoria's face, searching for any crack in that perfect professional armor, any sign that the woman felt even a flicker of guilt for what she had done. But Victoria Sterling hadn't become a billionaire by being easy to read. She took another step closer, and now she was near enough that Emma could smell her expensive perfume, something floral and subtle that probably cost more than a month of Emma's father's salary. Victoria reached out slowly, and for a moment Emma thought she was going to take the photograph. Instead, the CEO's finger traced the air just above the image, not quite touching it, as if contact might burn her. Her eyes were fixed on the two young people, frozen in that moment of hope and possibility, and Emma saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice had changed. It was softer now, stripped of its corporate sheen, and it carried a weight that Emma hadn't expected. "I remember," Victoria said quietly. "I remember that day. We had just signed the lease on that space. We were so excited we could barely contain it. We thought we were going to change the world." She paused, and something that might have been pain crossed her face before she locked it away again. "We were naive." Emma felt a surge of anger, hot and bright in her chest. "You weren't naive. You were partners, friends, and when he needed you most, when his wife was dying and his world was falling apart, you took everything from him. You made him sign papers he wasn't in any state to understand, and you built this whole empire on what should have been his too." The words were tumbling out now, faster and faster, fueled by 3 months of suppressed fury and a decade of watching her father struggle. "Do you have any idea what his life is like? Do you ever even look at him when you walk past? He mops your floors, he empties your garbage, he's invisible to you, but he used to be your partner. He used to matter." Victoria's jaw tightened, and for a moment Emma thought she'd gone too far, that the CEO was about to call security after all and have her dragged out of the building. But instead, Victoria turned away, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The morning sun was just beginning to paint the buildings in shades of gold and amber. The woman stood silhouetted against that light, her shoulders rigid with tension. When she spoke again, her voice was so quiet that Emma had to strain to hear it. "Your father is why I'm in this office at 6 in the morning every Tuesday," Victoria said, "because Tuesday's the day his mother died, 28 years ago today. And I know he's in this building working his shift, and I know he goes down to the break room at 6:45 to eat his sandwich alone." She turned back to face Emma, and there was something raw and unguarded in her expression now. "I know his schedule better than I know my own. I know he takes the early bus on Thursdays because it's cheaper than the later one. I know he buys his coffee from the food cart on the corner, never from the lobby cafe. I know he lives in the Riverside Apartments on Mitchell Street, Unit 214. I know everything about James Chun's life because I've spent the last 7 years trying to figure out how to fix what I broke." Emma stared at her, the photograph still clutched in her hands. The anger that had been burning so bright was suddenly confused, tangled up with something else. This wasn't the response she had expected. She had expected denial or dismissal or maybe even cold justification. She hadn't expected this confession that sounded like it had been torn from somewhere deep and painful inside the woman. "Then why haven't you?" Emma demanded, her voice cracking with emotion. "If you know all of that, if you've been watching him for 7 years, why haven't you done anything? Why do you let him clean floors when he should be in a boardroom? Why do you let him struggle when you have more money than you could ever spend?" Her hands were shaking now, and tears were finally spilling down her cheeks. "Why did you take everything from him?" Victoria closed her eyes for a long moment, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears of her own. "Because he won't let me fix it," she said, her voice breaking. "I tried, Emma. The day I found out he was working here, I went to him. I cornered him in the parking garage and I told him I wanted to make things right. I offered him everything. A position in the company, back pay for his share, an executive title, anything he wanted." She drew in a shuddering breath. "And do you know what he said to me?" Emma shook her head, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. "He said that he didn't want my pity, that he had made his choice when he signed those papers and he had to live with it. That working here was his choice, his way of reminding himself of what he had lost." Victoria's voice was thick with emotion now, the professional mask completely shattered. "He said that the only thing I could do to help him was to leave him alone and let him do his job. So that's what I did. For 7 years, I have left him alone. I've watched him from a distance. I've tried to help in ways he wouldn't notice. Anonymous donations to scholarship funds for children of employees, extra holiday bonuses, making sure his health insurance was the best the company offered. But I couldn't help him directly because he wouldn't let me, and I couldn't force him to accept what he didn't want." Emma felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she had believed about this situation, every assumption she had built her righteous anger on, was crumbling like sand. She had come here prepared to confront a villain, a heartless corporate monster who had stolen from her father and never looked back. But the woman standing before her, tears now streaming openly down her face, was something far more complicated than that. She was someone who had made a terrible mistake and had spent 7 years trying to atone for it, only to be refused at every turn. The photograph suddenly felt heavier in Emma's hands, as if it carried not just the weight of the past, but the burden of all the years that had followed. "But that doesn't make sense," Emma said, her voice small and confused. "If you wanted to help him, why did you take his share in the first place? Why did you make him sign those papers when he was at his lowest?" Victoria walked back to her desk and sank into her chair, suddenly looking older and infinitely more tired. She gestured to one of the expensive leather chairs across from her, an invitation. Emma hesitated for a moment, then moved forward and sat down, still clutching the photograph like a lifeline. The CEO leaned back, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and when she began to speak, it was as if she were confessing to a priest, unburdening herself of a sin that had grown too heavy to carry alone. "I was terrified," Victoria said simply. "When your mother got sick, when the medical bills started coming, I watched my best friend fall apart." James was brilliant, Emma. He was the smartest person I had ever met, but he was also sensitive in a way I never was. He felt things deeply. When your mother's diagnosis came, it destroyed him. He couldn't focus. He couldn't work. He would come to the office and just stare at his computer screen for hours without accomplishing anything, and I understood why. Of course I understood. She pressed her palms against her eyes as if she could push back the memories. But the company was also falling apart. We had investors breathing down our necks. We had deadlines we were missing. We had competitors circling like sharks. I was holding everything together by my fingernails, working 20-hour days, trying to do my job and your father's job and keep us afloat. Emma listened, her anger warring with a reluctant understanding. She didn't want to sympathize with this, but she could hear the genuine anguish in Victoria's voice, the pain of someone recounting a decision that had haunted her for years. "I convinced myself I was doing the right thing," Victoria continued, lowering her hands and looking directly at Emma. "I told myself that James needed to be free to focus on his wife, that the stress of the company was making everything worse for him. I told myself that buying out his share would give him the money he desperately needed for medical bills, and it would remove the burden of a failing business from his shoulders." She laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. "I told myself a lot of things, but the truth I didn't want to admit even to myself at the time, was that I was angry with him for leaving me to do everything alone. I was resentful that he got to focus on love and family while I was drowning in spreadsheets and investor calls. And I was terrified that if he came back and couldn't perform at his old level, we would lose everything we had built. So I protected myself. I protected the company, and I told myself it was for his own good." The honesty was brutal and raw, and Emma found herself gripping the arms of the chair. This wasn't a simple story of good and evil. It was a story of two people caught in an impossible situation, both making choices that made sense at the time but had devastating consequences. She thought of her father, how he had never once spoken badly of Victoria, how he had simply said that he had signed the papers and had to live with his decision. Had he understood, even then, that Victoria had been drowning too? Had some part of him recognized that they had both been victims of circumstances beyond their control? "When did you realize you had made a mistake?" Emma asked quietly. Victoria's smile was sad and small. "The day the company went public, I was standing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, ringing the opening bell, cameras everywhere, reporters calling my name, the stock price soaring. It was supposed to be the greatest moment of my life, and all I could think about was that James should have been standing beside me, that his name should have been on that building, that every article praising me as a self-made success was a lie because I hadn't done it alone." She looked down at her hands, which were clenched into fists on the desk. "I tried to call him that day. I wanted to share it with him, to tell him that we had made it, that the dream we had started in that little storefront had become real, but he didn't answer. And when I went to find him a few days later, I discovered he had moved, left no forwarding address, just disappeared. It took me 3 years to find him again," Victoria continued. 3 years of private investigators and searching and dead ends. And when I finally tracked him down, he was working as a night custodian at a shopping mall, living in that same tiny apartment with you, raising you alone, barely scraping by. And I realized that while I had been building an empire, he had been building something far more important. He had been building a life with his daughter. He had been present for every moment of your childhood. He had been the parent your mother couldn't be. And he had done it all without any help from me, without any of the money he should have had, without any of the recognition he deserved. Emma felt tears streaming down her own cheeks now. She thought of all the nights her father had come home exhausted, his hands raw from cleaning chemicals, his back aching from hours of physical labor. She thought of how he had never complained, never made her feel like their poverty was a burden. He had always made sure she had what she needed, even if it meant he went without. He had packed her lunches every day with careful attention, making sure she had her favorite snacks even when they couldn't afford much else. He had helped her with her homework every night, his patience endless even when he must have been bone tired. He had never missed a parent-teacher conference or a school play. He had been everything to her, and he had done it all while carrying the weight of his lost dreams. "That's when I arranged for him to work here," Victoria said. "I couldn't help him if he knew it was me, so I worked through intermediaries, made sure his application was flagged, made sure he got the position, made sure his pay was higher than standard for custodial staff, though not so much higher that he would question it. I thought that if he worked here, I could at least keep an eye on him, make sure he was okay, find ways to help that he wouldn't notice." She looked at Emma with desperate intensity. I know how it sounds. I know it seems like I kept him close to punish him or to remind him of what he lost, but it was the opposite. I kept him close because it was the only way I could bear the guilt, the only way I could try to protect him, even from a distance. Emma stared at the photograph in her hands, seeing it with new eyes. The two young people in the image looked so happy, so full of hope and possibility. They had no idea what was coming. They couldn't have known that in just a few years their friendship would be tested in the cruelest way possible. They would both make choices that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. That they would end up as strangers sharing the same building but living in entirely different worlds. She looked up at Victoria, at this powerful woman who commanded billions of dollars and thousands of employees, and saw that underneath all the corporate armor was just someone who had made a terrible mistake and didn't know how to fix it. He needs to know, Emma said finally, her voice steady despite her tears. He needs to know that you tried, that you've been trying. He thinks you forgot about him, thinks you don't even see him, but you've been watching over him all this time. Victoria shook her head, new tears spilling down her cheeks. He doesn't want to know. I told you I tried to talk to him. He made it clear that he wanted nothing from me except to be left alone. Emma stood up, walking around the desk before she could second-guess herself. She placed the photograph on the polished surface directly in front of Victoria, the two young people smiling up at them both. Then she did something that surprised even herself. She reached out and took the CEO's hand, this woman she had come here hating, and squeezed it gently. My dad is stubborn, Emma said. It's one of his worst qualities. He holds on to his pain like it's something precious, like letting it go would mean betraying my mom's memory. But he's also the kindest, most forgiving person I know. And I think the reason he won't let you help him isn't because he hates you, it's because he's ashamed. She saw Victoria's eyes widen, saw the understanding beginning to dawn. He signed those papers, he gave up his share of the company, and in his mind that makes him a failure. He can't accept your help because it would mean admitting that he made the wrong choice, that he let grief cloud his judgment, that he wasn't strong enough to hold on to what he had built. It would mean facing the what-ifs, and those are too painful. Victoria stared at Emma with something like wonder, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Here was a 10-year-old child, the daughter of the man whose life she had derailed, and yet this child was offering understanding instead of condemnation. Emma had every right to hate her, to spit accusations and demand justice, but instead she was holding her hand and speaking with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. Victoria felt something crack open inside her chest, a wall she had built around her guilt beginning to crumble. "You sound just like him," Victoria whispered. "Like your father." That's exactly the kind of thing he would say. He always understood people in ways I never could. He could look at someone and see not just who they were, but why they were that way. I always envied that about him. I could see business opportunities and market trends, but James could see hearts. Emma smiled through her tears. He says, "I get it from my mom. She was a social worker before she got sick. She spent her days helping people who had nothing, people that everyone else had given up on. He says she had a gift for seeing the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. I think maybe I got some of that from both of them." Victoria picked up the photograph, holding it carefully as if it might disintegrate in her hands. She studied the faces of the two young people, frozen in that moment of happiness, and Emma could see the weight of 7 years of regret settling over her like a physical burden. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes when words have been said that needed saying, when truth has been spoken and is being absorbed, processed, understood. "What do we do now?" Victoria asked finally, her voice small and uncertain. It was strange to hear that tone from someone so powerful, someone whose decisions affected thousands of lives and moved millions of dollars. But in this moment she wasn't a CEO, she was just a woman who had lost her best friend and didn't know how to get him back. Emma had been thinking about this question for 3 weeks. Ever since she had found the photograph and decided to take action, she had imagined confronting Victoria and exposing her crimes, forcing her to make things right. She had imagined dramatic apology, tearful reunion. But now that she understood the full complexity of the situation, she realized that nothing about this was simple. Her father's pride was a wall as strong as any that Victoria had built around her guilt, and simply throwing money at the problem or forcing a confrontation would only make him retreat further into his isolation. "I think we need to show him," Emma said slowly, the idea forming even as she spoke. "Not tell him, show him. He won't accept your help if he knows it's coming from you. He won't listen if you try to explain, but if he could see the truth for himself, if he could understand that you've been trying to protect him all this time, then maybe he could start to forgive himself. And if he can forgive himself, maybe he can accept what you're offering." Victoria leaned forward, her business mind engaging with the problem. "What did you have in mind?" Emma thought about her father, about his routines and his habits, about the things that mattered to him. He was a deeply private person who had learned to be invisible, to move through the world without leaving a trace. But there was one place where he couldn't hide, one area where his heart was completely exposed. Her. He would do anything for his daughter. He would face any fear, overcome any obstacle, swallow any pride if it meant giving her a better life. "You said you've been helping anonymously," Emma said. "The scholarship funds, the bonuses, insurance. What if there was a scholarship for children of employees, a really good one, one that would pay for everything?" Private school, college, whatever. And what if I won? What if I got it? She watched Victoria's face as understanding began to dawn. He would never accept help for himself, but he couldn't turn down something that was for me, something I earned on my own merit. It would be my achievement, not his failure. Victoria's eyes were sharp now, calculating, seeing the angles, but it can't be obvious. If there's suddenly a new scholarship that perfectly fits your circumstances, he'll know something is wrong. He's too smart for that. It doesn't have to be new, Emma said. It just has to be real. Something that's been around for a while, something legitimate that I actually apply for and qualify for. You just need to make sure I get it. She hesitated, then pushed forward. And there's something else. Something bigger. My dad won't work here forever doing what he's doing now. He's too talented, too smart. But he won't apply for other positions because he doesn't believe anyone would hire him. He thinks he's just a janitor. So what if someone noticed him? What if someone in the company saw his potential and offered him something better? Not from you directly, but from someone else? Someone who doesn't know your history? Victoria was nodding now, her mind racing through possibilities. I have a new division starting up. Innovation and development. It's focused on finding unconventional solutions to technical problems. The director is someone I trust completely, someone who values intelligence over credentials. If your father's abilities came to his attention in the right way, he might offer him a position, not charity. A real job based on real merit. Emma felt a flutter of hope in her chest, but there was still one huge obstacle, one mountain they needed to climb. My dad would never apply for a job like that. He's convinced himself that he doesn't deserve it, that he gave up his right to that kind of work when he signed those papers. We can't just post a job listing and hope he applies. Then we create a situation where his skills become visible, Victoria said. And Emma could see the strategic mind that had built an empire clicking into gear, where he has to demonstrate what he can do, not to get a job, but just in the natural course of his work. We create a problem that needs solving, something that crosses his path, and we wait to see if he solves it. The two of them sat there, the CEO and the janitor's daughter, the photograph of the past between them, planning a future that seemed impossible. Emma felt strange sitting in this office, collaborating with the woman she had thought of as her enemy just an hour ago. But the world was more complicated than she had understood. People were more complicated. Victoria Sterling wasn't a villain. She was someone who had made a terrible choice in a moment of fear and desperation, and who had spent years trying to atone for it in the only ways she knew how. And Emma's father wasn't a victim passively accepting his fate. He was someone actively choosing his pain, holding on to it like penance for a sin he believed he had committed. There's one more thing, Emma said quietly. Eventually you two need to talk, really talk. Not you trying to offer him things and him refusing, but both of you being honest about what happened, about why you did what you did and why he's been punishing himself. She looked at Victoria steadily. He needs to hear that you've been sorry, that you've been trying, and you need to hear that he doesn't hate you. He just hates himself for what he lost. Victoria's composure finally broke completely. She put her face in her hands and sobbed, great shuddering cries that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her soul. Emma moved around the desk and wrapped her small arms around the woman's shoulders. This powerful CEO who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, but who was, in the end, just a person carrying a burden of guilt too heavy to bear alone. They stayed like that for a long moment, the silence of the office broken only by the sound of Victoria's crying and the distant hum of the city waking up outside. When Victoria finally composed herself, she pulled a tissue from her desk drawer and wiped her face, smearing her perfect makeup. She looked at Emma with red-rimmed eyes and something that might have been gratitude or relief, or perhaps just exhaustion. I don't deserve your kindness, she said. I don't deserve your father's daughter treating me with more grace than I've shown him. Emma shook her head. My mom used to say that forgiveness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what we need to let go of so we can move forward. At least that's what my dad told me, she said. I think maybe she was right. She picked up the photograph from the desk and held it out to Victoria. I want you to keep this, to remember who you both were before everything fell apart, to remember that you were friends once and maybe you can be friends again. Victoria took the photograph with trembling hands, staring at it as if it were the most precious thing she had ever been given. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for believing we can be more than our mistakes. Emma glanced at the clock on the wall and felt a jolt of panic. Her father's break would be over soon, and he would be making his way through the building on his cleaning route. If he found her here, if he discovered what she had done, all of this would fall apart before it even began. She needed to leave, to get out before she was discovered. But as she turned to go, Victoria's voice stopped her. Wait, Victoria said, standing quickly. Emma, how do I reach you? If we're going to do this, if we're going to help your father without him knowing, we need to be able to communicate. But I can't call your home phone. I can't risk him finding out. Emma thought quickly, then pulled a small notebook from her backpack and scribbled something down. This is my email. I have an account I use for school projects. I check it every day after school at the library. Send me messages there, but don't use your name. Use the name from the photo. Use Sterling from when it was Chun and Sterling. That way if my dad somehow sees it, he'll just think it's spam or something random. Victoria took the paper and nodded, already committing the address to memory. I'll send you something today. We need to move quickly on the scholarship. Applications are reviewed on a rolling basis and the next round of decisions is in 2 weeks. Can you pull together your grades, your teacher recommendations, everything that would make a strong application? I have all of that already, Emma said. I've been preparing for scholarship applications for months. My guidance counselor said I should apply to as many as possible because we can't afford private school otherwise. She felt a pang of sadness saying it out loud, acknowledging the financial reality that had shaped so much of her life. But my dad doesn't know how many I'm applying for. He just knows I'm trying, so one more won't seem strange. Good, Victoria said, her voice taking on the brisk efficiency of an executive solving a problem. The Sterling Industries Educational Excellence Scholarship has been running for 5 years. It's legitimate, competitive, and covers full tuition plus living expenses for private school and college. 50 employees' children apply each year. 3 are select. You'll be one of them, but your application needs to be genuinely strong so that when it's announced, no one questions it, especially not your father. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of what they were planning settle over her. This wasn't just about revealing the truth to her father. It was about building an elaborate web of circumstances that would guide him toward a better life, without him realizing he was being guided. It felt deceptive, and yet it also felt necessary. Sometimes people needed to be saved from themselves, from their own stubborn pride and their own crushing guilt. There's one more thing, Victoria said, her voice softer now. When this works, when your father finally knows the truth and we have our conversation, he's going to ask you how you found out about our history. He's going to know you came to me. What will you tell him? Emma had thought about this already. She met Victoria's eyes steadily. I'll tell him the truth, that I found the photograph, that I came here angry, ready to fight for him, and that I discovered the situation was more complicated than I understood. I'll tell him that sometimes the people we think are our enemies are just people who made mistakes and didn't know how to fix them. She saw Victoria's eyes fill with tears again. And I'll tell him that I think he should listen to what you have to say, really listen before he decides anything. Victoria walked around the desk and pulled Emma into a tight hug, and Emma hugged her back, feeling the woman's shoulders shake with silent sob. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria wiped her eyes and managed a watery smile. Your mother would be very proud of you, and so would the James Chun I used to know. You have his heart and her courage. That's a powerful combination. Emma felt her own tears threatening again, but she blinked them back. She needed to be strong now. She needed to get out of this building without being seen and make it to school before anyone noticed her absence. I have to go, she said. Send me an email tonight. Tell me what you need from me for the scholarship. And tell me when you'll have the other thing ready. The problem my dad needs to solve. I will, Victoria promised. And Emma, thank you. Thank you for giving me a chance to make this right. I know I don't deserve it, but I promise you I won't waste it. Emma slipped out of the office, her heart pounding as she moved quickly through the empty executive hallway. It was nearly 7:30 now, and the building was starting to wake up. She could hear the ding of elevator bells, the murmur of early arriving employees, the click of heels on marble floors. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, racing down flight after flight until she emerged on the ground floor lobby. She pulled her hood up and kept her head down, walking quickly past the security desk where a guard was distracted by his coffee and newspaper. Then she was outside, the morning air cool on her flushed face, and she was running toward the bus stop, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She made it to school with 5 minutes to spare before the first bell. As she slid into her seat in homeroom, her best friend Keisha gave her a curious look. Girl, why are you all sweaty? You look like you just ran a marathon. Just running late, Emma said, trying to catch her breath and slow her racing heart. Missed my usual bus. It wasn't technically a lie, though it wasn't the whole truth either. She couldn't tell Keisha what she had done, couldn't explain where she had really been. This secret was too big, too important to share with anyone. She would have to carry it alone until the plan came to fruition, until her father's life changed in ways he couldn't yet imagine. That afternoon at the library, Emma logged into her email account and found a message waiting for her. The sender was listed simply as Sterling Tech. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Emma, the message began. I've started putting things in motion. Attached, you'll find the scholarship application. Fill it out completely and honestly. Have your guidance counselors submit your transcripts and recommendations directly to the email address listed. The selection committee will review applications at the end of this month. I've also spoken with Marcus Webb, the director of our Innovation and Development Division. He doesn't know about my history with your father, and I've told him nothing except that we have talented people throughout the company whose skills may not match their current positions. He's agreed to help me create a company-wide problem-solving initiative. We're going to plan a complex coding problem in various areas of the building, disguised as a malfunction in our new environmental control systems. The system will seem to be malfunctioning in ways that affect the comfort and productivity of employees. Anyone who can identify the source of the problem and propose a solution will be rewarded. Marcus will be watching to see who responds. Problem will be complex enough that most people won't even realize it can be solved, but someone with your father's background would recognize it immediately. I'm going to make sure the problem is most noticeable on his route. The rest is up to him and up to fate. I'll keep you updated. Remember, check this email daily, but tell no one. We're building your father a bridge back to the life he deserves, but he can't know the bridge is there until he's already walking across it. Be strong, Emma. What you did today took incredible courage. Don't lose that courage now. We're going to make this right. The message wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Emma read it 3 times, memorizing the details, then deleted it and cleared her browser history. She logged out and sat back in the hard plastic library chairs, staring at the computer screen as it returned to its neutral login page. Everything was in motion now. There was no going back. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma lived 2 lives. Quote, in one life, she was a normal 10-year-old girl going to school, doing her homework, playing with her friends, and eating dinner with her father every night. She listened to him talk about his day, about the small frustrations and tiny victories of his work. She helped him grade the essays he was always reading because, in addition to his custodial job, her father tutored students online in the evening, using his computer science knowledge to help high schoolers understand programming concepts. She watched television with him and laughed at the same shows and never gave any indication that anything had changed. But in her other life, the secret life, she was a co-conspirator in an elaborate plan to change her father's future. She filled out the scholarship application with painstaking care, writing essays about her dreams and her goals, about the importance of education and the sacrifices her father had made to give her opportunities he never had. She met with her guidance counselor and requested that transcripts and recommendations be sent to the Sterling Industries scholarship program. She checked her secret email account every day, reading Victoria's updates about the progress of their plan. The environmental control system problem had been implemented. Marcus Webb was monitoring the company's response. Several mid-level managers had noticed the issues but had simply complained to IT without investigating further. The IT department had looked at the surface-level code and found nothing wrong, declaring it a hardware issue. Maintenance had checked the hardware and found it functioning perfectly. The problem persisted, and employees were getting frustrated with the inexplicable temperature fluctuations and air quality issues in certain areas of the building. And every night, Emma watched her father come home tired and aching from his shift, smelling of cleaning chemicals and hard work, and she said nothing. She kept her secret locked away in her heart, a seed of hope that she was nurturing in silence, waiting for it to bloom. James Chun had noticed the environmental control problem on his second night of the week. He was wiping down the conference room on the 35th floor when he felt the temperature suddenly drop by what must have been 10 degrees. The air that had been comfortably warm became frigid enough that he could see his breath misting in front of him. Then just as suddenly, the room became stifling hot, the air thick and oppressive. He had frowned, made a note to mention it to maintenance, and continued with his work. But over the next few nights, he noticed the problem was spreading. The temperature fluctuations were happening in multiple areas of the building, following no discernible pattern. Conference rooms, offices, hallways, even the cafeteria on the 22nd floor. It was random and chaotic, and it was making people miserable. He overheard complaints from employees who stayed late, programmers and analysts griping about how they couldn't concentrate with the temperature swinging wildly. He saw the frustrated emails IT had sent out assuring everyone they were working on the problem but couldn't identify the source. He watched maintenance technicians crawl through ceiling panels, checking ducts and sensors, finding nothing wrong. And despite himself, despite his determination to keep his head down and do only what was required of him, James felt his curiosity stirring. It was a familiar sensation, one he hadn't felt in years. The intellectual itch that used to drive him, the need to understand how things worked and why they broke. He tried to ignore it. He was a janitor. This wasn't his problem to solve. The company had entire departments full of educated, well-paid professionals. His job was to handle technicals. He pushed his cart through the hallways, mopped the floors, emptied the trash, and told himself to mind his own business. But the itch wouldn't go away. He found himself pausing near the environmental control panels mounted on various walls, reading the digital displays, noting the temperature readings and the status lights. He found himself thinking about the building's systems, about how they were integrated, about what could cause this kind of seemingly random malfunction. On his break one night, sitting in the small custodial office in the basement, he pulled out his phone and started searching for information about the building's environmental management system. He learned that Sterling Industries had recently upgraded to a state-of-the-art smart system that was supposed to use artificial intelligence to optimize temperature and air quality based on occupancy patterns and energy efficiency. It was the kind of cutting-edge technology that James would have been fascinated by in his old life, the kind of system he would have loved to work on, to understand, to improve. He caught himself smiling as he read about the system's architecture, and then the smile faded. This wasn't his world anymore. He had given up his right to this kind of work when he signed those papers 7 years ago. But that night, as he was cleaning the executive floor, he found himself standing in front of one of the main control panels. It was late, past 2 in the morning, and the building was empty except for him and the security guards. No one would see him. No one would know. His fingers hovered over the panel's touchscreen. He could log into the diagnostic interface using the building maintenance credentials that all custodial staff had access to for reporting issues. He could take a look, just a quick look, at the system's code, just to satisfy his curiosity, just to see if he could spot what everyone else had missed. He told himself he was being foolish. He told himself to walk away, but his fingers were already moving, entering the credentials, navigating through the menus to the diagnostic interface, and there it was, the code that ran the building's environmental systems. Thousands of lines of instructions that told the sensors when to heat and when to cool, how to balance airflow and maintain optimal conditions. James stared at the screen, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt something inside him wake up. This was his language. This was the world where he had once been fluent, where he had once been brilliant. His eyes scanned the code, looking for anomalies, searching for the flaw that everyone else had missed. It took him 20 minutes to find it. The problem wasn't in the environmental control system itself. It was in the integration layer. the software that connected the environmental system to the building's occupancy sensors and the energy management system. Someone, probably during the upgrade installation, had introduced a rounding error in one of the calculation functions. It was tiny, almost invisible, just a few decimal places off. But that error was causing the system to misinterpret the occupancy data, leading it to make wildly incorrect decisions about temperature control. The room would read as empty when it was full, or full when it was empty, and the system would respond accordingly. The error was compounding over time as the AI learned from these false inputs, making the problem progressively worse. James stood there in the silent hallway staring at the screen and felt a rush of emotions he couldn't quite name. Satisfaction at having solved the puzzle, sadness that this was a world he no longer belonged to, and underneath it all, a deep, aching longing for the person he used to be. He could fix this. He could write a simple patch that would correct the rounding error and recalibrate the system. It would take him maybe an hour, and the problem that had been plaguing the entire building for weeks would disappear. But if he did that, people would ask questions. They would want to know who had fixed it, how a night janitor had managed to solve a problem that had stumped the IT department and the system engineers. And James couldn't bear the thought of that attention, that scrutiny, that reminder of everything he had lost. He logged out of the diagnostic interface and stepped back from the panel. He would tell maintenance what he had found. He would explain the problem in simple terms, point them in the right direction, and let them take credit for the solution. That was the safe choice, the choice that let him remain invisible. He returned to his cart and continued his work, trying to focus on the familiar rhythm of cleaning, trying to push down the part of him that wanted more, that remembered what it felt like to build things and solve problems and be valued for his mind rather than his labor. But the next morning, when he went to write up his findings in a maintenance report, he found himself hesitating. How could he explain that he had been looking at the diagnostic code? Why would a janitor have any reason to access that system? It would raise questions he didn't want to answer. So instead, he wrote a vague note about temperature irregularities he had observed and suggested that maintenance might want to check the integration between different building systems. It was deliberately unhelpful, deliberately obscure, and he felt a twist of guilt as he filed it. He was choosing invisibility over usefulness, choosing to protect himself rather than help solve a problem that was making hundreds of people miserable. That evening, when he came home, Emma was waiting for him at the kitchen table. She had made dinner, a simple pasta dish that was one of the few things she knew how to cook. She smiled at him as he came in, but there was something in her eyes, a searching quality that made him uncomfortable. "Daddy," she said as they ate, "do you ever miss your old job, the one you had before I was born?" James nearly choked on his pasta. Emma rarely asked about his past. She knew the basic facts, that he had once worked in technology, that he had given it up after her mother died, but they didn't talk about it. It was an unspoken agreement between them, a door that remained closed. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "I was just thinking about it," she said, pushing her food around her plate. "You're so smart, Daddy. You help all those kids with their programming homework, and they always say you're the best tutor they've ever had. Don't you ever wish you could do that kind of work again? Like, as a real job instead of just at night?" James felt his chest tighten. "Honey, I have a real job. I provide for us. That's what matters." Emma looked at him with those two wise eyes that saw through his deflections. "But what about what you want? Don't you want more than just providing? Don't you want to use your brain the way you used to?" He couldn't answer her. He couldn't explain that wanting more felt like a betrayal of the choice he had made. That ambition felt like a luxury he had forfeited when he signed those papers. He couldn't tell her that every day he walked through Sterling Industries, he was punishing himself, reminding himself that this was what he deserved for his moment of weakness. So he just smiled and changed the subject, asking her about school, and Emma let it go. But he could feel her watching him throughout dinner, and he wondered what had prompted these questions. Wondered if she somehow sensed the turmoil that was churning inside him. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, James sat at their small kitchen table with his laptop open. He pulled up the notes he had taken about the environmental control problem, the code sequences he had memorized, the solution that was sitting fully formed in his mind. He opened a text document and began to write, not a vague maintenance report, but a detailed technical analysis. He explained the rounding error, showed exactly where in the code it was occurring, and provided step-by-step instructions for fixing it. He included a corrected version of the problematic function, properly commented and optimized. It was the kind of work he used to do without thinking, the kind of solution that used to earn him praise and respect. When he finished, James stared at the document for a long time. It was good work. It was the kind of work that proved he still had the skills that the years of mopping floors and emptying trash cans hadn't erased what he used to. But submitting it would mean stepping out of the shadows, mean risking questions and attention and the possibility that people would learn who he really was. His hand hovered over the mouse, cursor positioned over the delete button. It would be so easy to just erase it all, to go back to being invisible, to maintain the safe, small life he had built for himself and Emma. But then Then he thought about his daughter's questions at dinner. Don't you ever wish you could do that kind of work again? Don't you want to use your brain the way you used to? And he thought about the employees he saw every day, frustrated and uncomfortable because of a problem he could solve but was choosing not to. When had he become someone who hoarded his knowledge out of fear? When had self-punishment become more important than being useful? His wife Sarah had always told him that his intelligence was a gift and that gifts were meant to be shared. He had spent 7 years refusing to share, hiding his light under a bushel because he believed he didn't deserve to shine. Before he could second-guess himself, James saved the document and attached it to an email. He addressed it to the building management system, the general inbox that IT and maintenance monitored for reports. He didn't include his name or position. He simply wrote, "I noticed the environmental control issues and believe I've identified the source. The attached document explains the problem and provides a solution. I hope this helps." Then he hit send, closed his laptop, and went to bed with his heart pounding like he had just committed a crime. The email landed in Marcus Webb's inbox 2 days later. As the Director of Innovation and Development, Marcus had been copied on all communications related to the environmental control problem, which had become something of an embarrassment for the company. The IT department was frustrated, maintenance was defensive, and employees were increasingly vocal in their complaints. He opened the email expecting another useless observation about hot conference rooms or cold hallways, but what he found instead made him sit up straight in his chair. This was a serious technical analysis. Whoever had written it had deep knowledge of both the environmental control system and the building's integrated software architecture. The explanation of the rounding error was elegant and precise. The proposed solution was brilliant in its simplicity. Marcus immediately forwarded it to his senior systems engineer, who called him 10 minutes later. "This is it," the engineer said, his voice excited. "This is exactly what we've been missing. The error is so subtle that our automated testing never caught it, but it explains everything. We can implement this fix today and the problem will be resolved." "Who sent this?" Marcus looked at the email header. It had come from inside the company network, but there was no name attached, just a generic employee ID number. He called IT and asked them to trace it. What he learned made him frown in confusion. The email had been sent from the employee portal account of James Chun, a night shift custodial worker. Marcus looked at the man's personnel file. High school diploma, 7 years with the company in janitorial services. No technical background listed. No college degree. Nothing that would explain how a janitor had solved a problem that had stumped engineers with advanced degrees. Marcus was intrigued. This was exactly the kind of hidden talent he had told Victoria Sterling he was looking for when she had approached him about the problem-solving initiative. Someone whose abilities far exceeded their current position. Someone who thought differently than the credentialed experts. He made a decision. He would implement the fix without announcing who had provided it, and then he would quietly investigate James Chun. If this man had the skills to solve complex technical problems, Marcus wanted him in innovation and development, regardless of what his resume said. The environmental control system was fixed by that afternoon. The temperature stabilized throughout the building, and the complaints stopped. IT sent out an email thanking everyone for their patience and announcing that the issue had been resolved, but they provided no details about how or by whom. James saw the email on his phone during his break, and he felt a complicated mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that he had been able to help without drawing attention to himself. Disappointment that his contribution would remain anonymous, that no one would ever know he had been the one to fix it. But Emma knew something had changed. She saw it in the way her father held himself a little straighter when he came home the next morning. She saw it in the small smile that played at the corners of his mouth as he made breakfast. And when she checked her email at the library that afternoon, Victoria's message confirmed it. "Your father solved the problem. Marcus Webb is very interested in meeting. He's going to arrange a casual encounter, something that seems natural rather than formal. Be ready. Things are about to change. The scholarship committee is meeting next week. You're going to be selected. I've seen your application and your grades. Even without my influence, you would have been a strong candidate, but I've made sure everything is falling into place." Emma felt a thrill of anticipation mixed with terror. The plan was working, but it also meant that soon the truth would come out. Soon her father would learn what she had done, what Victoria had been doing, and the carefully constructed walls he had built around his grief and guilt would come crashing down. She didn't know if he would be grateful or furious. She didn't know if this would heal him or break him further, but it was too late to turn back now. Marcus Webb's encounter with James Chun happened on a Thursday night, carefully orchestrated to seem coincidental. Marcus made a point of working late, staying in his office until well past midnight. He waited until he saw the custodial cart appear at the end of his hallway, then stepped out of his office, stretching as if he had been working for hours and needed a break. James was wiping down the water fountain outside the Innovation and Development Suite, and Marcus approached him with a friendly smile. "Working late too, I see," Marcus said, his tone conversational. James looked up, startled to be addressed directly. Most employees treated the custodial staff as furniture, present but not worthy of acknowledgement. "Yes, sir, just finishing up this floor." Marcus leaned against the wall, projecting casual ease. "I wanted to thank you, actually. That environmental control problem that's been driving everyone crazy. Someone sent in an analysis that solved it. Brilliant work. Saved us weeks of troubleshooting." James felt his pulse quicken. He kept his expression carefully neutral. That's good to hear, sir. I know a lot of people complaining about it. The thing is Marcus continued, watching James's face carefully. The person who sent it didn't leave a name, just an employee ID that traced back to the custodial department. And I've been wondering, because the level of technical knowledge required to identify that problem and write that solution is pretty extraordinary. Not something you'd expect from most people in the building, let alone someone in maintenance. James felt trapped. He could deny it, could claim he had no idea what Marcus was talking about, but lying had never come easily to him. And besides, there was something in the way this man was looking at him that suggested denial would be pointless. I used to work in software, James said finally, his voice quiet. A long time ago, I saw the problem and recognized the pattern. I thought I could help. Marcus nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. Used to work in software. That's interesting. Would you mind if I asked where? James hesitated. This was the question he had been dreading, the one that would open doors he had kept locked for 7 years. Small startup. It didn't work out. That was all he wanted to say, all he could bear to reveal. But Marcus pressed gently. What kind of work did you do there? The solution you wrote showed sophisticated understanding of system architecture and integration. That's not basic programming. That's the kind of thinking that builds platforms. James felt something in his chest tighten. This man was perceptive, more perceptive than James had anticipated. He was being backed into a corner, forced to acknowledge skills he had spent years pretending he didn't have. I did systems architecture, he admitted. Integration solutions, making different technologies work together seamlessly. It was my specialty. Marcus's eyes lit up with genuine interest. That's exactly what we do in innovation and development. We solve problems that require thinking across traditional boundaries, connecting systems in novel ways. He paused, then made his offer, the one Victoria had prepared him to make without revealing why. I'd like you to consult on a project we're starting. Nothing formal, just come in during your off hours, take a look at what we're working on, and tell us if you see solutions we're missing. I'll pay you a consulting rate. $300 an hour. James felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. $300 an hour was more than he made in an entire night of custodial work. It was the kind of money that could change his and Emma's life, that could move them out of their cramped apartment, that could give his daughter opportunities he had only dreamed of providing. But accepting it would mean stepping back into the world he had abandoned, would mean admitting that he was more than just a janitor, would mean facing the person he used to be, and all the choices that had led him away from that life. I don't know, James said, his voice uncertain. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of work anymore. It's been a long time. I'm probably rusty. Marcus shook his head. The solution you wrote wasn't rusty. It was elegant and efficient, exactly the kind of thinking we need. Look, I'm not asking you to quit your current job or make any big commitments. Just come in, spend a few hours looking at our project, and give us your honest assessment. If it doesn't work out, no harm done. But I have a feeling you're exactly the kind of unconventional thinker we're looking for. James wanted to refuse. Every instinct he had developed over the past 7 years told him to decline politely, to retreat back into his safe and visible life. But he thought about Emma, about her questions at dinner, about the way she looked at him sometimes with a mixture of love and sadness, as if she could see how much of himself he had given up. He thought about his wife, Sarah, about how disappointed she would be to see him hiding his gifts, wasting his potential out of misplaced guilt. And he thought about the pure intellectual satisfaction he had felt solving the environmental control problem, the way his mind had come alive for the first time in years. Okay, he heard himself say. I'll try it, just once, to see if I can actually help. Marcus smiled broadly and extended his hand. James shook it, feeling like he was signing a contract he didn't fully understand, crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. They exchanged phone numbers, and Marcus told him to come by the Innovation and Development office on Saturday afternoon. They would be working on a project that had them stumped, something to do with integrating legacy systems with new AI architecture. James nodded, already feeling his mind start to engage with the problem, already feeling the old excitement building despite his fear. When he got home that morning, Emma was already awake, eating cereal at the kitchen table before school. She looked up at him with those perceptive eyes, and James had the strangest feeling that she already knew something had changed. How was work, Daddy? Interesting, he said, hanging up his jacket. Something unexpected happened. He sat down across from her, suddenly wanting to share this with his daughter, wanting her to understand that he was trying to be more than he had been. A man from one of the technical departments asked me to consult on a project. He wants to pay me to look at a problem they're working on. Emma's face lit up with genuine joy, and James felt a warmth in his chest at her reaction. Daddy, that's amazing, see? I told you people would want your help if they knew how smart you are. Are you going to do it? I think so, James said. I'm nervous about it. It's been so long since I've done that kind of work. What if I'm not as good as I used to be? What if I let them down? Emma reached across the table and took his hand, her small fingers squeezing his work-roughened ones. You won't let them down. You're brilliant, Daddy. You just forgot for a while. But brilliance doesn't go away. It's still there, waiting for you to use it again. James felt tears prick at his eyes. When had his 10-year-old daughter become so wise? When had she learned to see through his defenses and speak directly to his deepest fears? He squeezed her hand back, grateful beyond words for this child who believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. The week passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. James went to work each night as usual, but his mind was already elsewhere, thinking about the consulting project, rehearsing what he might say, worrying about whether he would be able to contribute anything of value. He found himself reviewing his old textbooks in the evening, refreshing his knowledge of systems architecture and integration protocols, trying to shake off the rust of 7 years of disuse. Emma watched him study with quiet satisfaction, knowing that the pieces were falling into place exactly as she and Victoria had planned. On Friday afternoon, Emma came home from school with an envelope. It was thick and official looking, with the Sterling Industries logo embossed on the corner. James was sleeping after his night shift, and Emma sat at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Her hands trembled as she tore it open and pulled out the letter inside. "Dear Miss Chun," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the Sterling Industries Educational Excellence Scholarship. This merit-based scholarship will provide full tuition coverage for your attendance at the private school of your choice, as well as a yearly stipend for books, supplies, and educational expenses. Additionally, the scholarship includes guaranteed college tuition coverage upon your high school graduation, contingent on maintaining academic standards. We were deeply impressed by your academic achievements, your teacher recommendations, and your personal essay about the value of education and sacrifice. You exemplify the qualities the scholarship was created to recognize." Emma read the letter 3 times, and each time her eyes filled with tears. This was real. This was happening. She had won a scholarship that would change her life, that would give her opportunities she had never dared to dream about. But underneath her joy was a more complicated emotion. A guilt about the deception, about the fact that while her application had been genuinely strong, the selection had not been entirely merit-based. She had been chosen because Victoria Sterling had made sure of it, because this was part of a larger plan to heal old wounds and right old wrongs. When James woke up that evening, Emma was waiting for him with the letter. She handed it to him without saying anything, just watched his face as he read. She saw the moment comprehension dawned, saw his eyes widen and his mouth fall open in shock. "Emma," he breathed. "Emma, this is incredible. This is life-changing." His voice broke with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you." He pulled her into a fierce hug, and Emma buried her face in his shoulder, feeling the weight of her secret pressing down on her. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to explain about Victoria and the photograph and the plan they had made. But this wasn't the right moment. He needed to experience his own breakthrough first. Needed to rediscover his value through the consulting work with Marcus Webb. Only then would he be ready to hear the full truth. That weekend, James went to Sterling Industries not as a custodial worker, but as a consultant. He wore the one good shirt he owned, the same one he had worn to his wife's funeral, and he carried a notebook and pen like a talisman. Marcus Webb greeted him warmly and led him into a conference room where 3 other engineers were gathered around a whiteboard covered in diagrams and code snippets. They explained the problem they were facing, a legacy inventory management system that needed to communicate with a new AI-driven predictive ordering platform. The 2 systems spoke different languages, used incompatible data structures, and no one could figure out how to build a bridge between them without completely rebuilding one or both systems. James listened carefully, asking clarifying questions, studying the diagrams on the whiteboard, and as he listened, something miraculous happened. His mind clicked into gear with a smoothness that surprised him. This was a puzzle, and puzzles were what he had always been best at solving. He began to see patterns, to understand the underlying structure of both systems, to envision a solution that no one else in the room had considered. He stood up and approached the whiteboard, picking up a marker with hands that were steadier than he expected. "What if we don't try to make them speak the same language?" he said. "What if we build a translator that sits between them, converting data in real time without either system needing to change?" He began to draw, his marker flying across the whiteboard, sketching out an architecture that was elegant in its simplicity. "We create a middleware layer that understands both systems. It listens to the legacy system, interprets its output, translates it into the format the AI platform expects, and then does the reverse for communications going the other way. Neither system needs to be rebuilt. They can remain exactly as they are. We just give them a way to understand each other." The room fell silent as the engineers studied his diagram. Then Marcus Webb started to laugh, a sound of pure delight and relief. "That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Why didn't we think of that?" "Because you were trying to change the systems instead of accepting them as they are and finding a creative solution," James said. "Sometimes the best answer isn't to rebuild everything. Sometimes it's to build a bridge." Over the next 3 hours, James worked with the team to flesh out his solution, writing pseudocode, identifying potential challenges, proposing ways to handle edge cases and errors. He felt like he was coming back to life, like a part of him that had been dormant was suddenly awake and singing. This was what he was meant to do. This was who he was supposed to be. When the session ended, Marcus walked James to the elevator, his hand on James's shoulder in a gesture of genuine camaraderie. "I'm going to be direct with you," he said. "That wasn't just consulting. That was the kind of thinking that defines what we do in innovation and development. I want to offer you a full-time position on my team. Senior systems architect, 6-figure salary, full benefits, stock option. You'd be working on projects exactly like this one, solving problems that no one else can figure out. James felt the world tilt again. This was happening too fast, spinning out of control in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. "I don't have a college degree," he said, grasping for a reason to refuse this opportunity that was too good to be true. "I don't have the credentials your other engineers have. Most of what I know is self-taught." Marcus shook his head firmly. "I don't care about credentials, I care about results. You just solved in 3 hours what my team with their advanced degrees couldn't solve in 3 weeks. That's all the credential I need." He pulled out a business card and handed it to James. "Think about it over the weekend. But James, I've been in this industry for 25 years. And I know rare talent when I see it. You're rare. Don't waste that." James took the card with numb fingers, rode the elevator down to the lobby, and walked out into the afternoon sunlight feeling like he had just woken up from a 7-year coma. The city looked different, brighter somehow, full of possibility instead of just obligation. He thought about Emma's scholarship, about this job offer, about how their lives could change if he just had the courage to say yes. But underneath his excitement was a deeper current of fear. If he accepted this position, he would have to walk through Sterling Industries every day, not as invisible custodial staff, but as someone visible, someone who mattered, someone who might be recognized. And there was one person in this building who would definitely recognize him, whose office was just a few floors above where he had been working today, Victoria Sterling. For 7 years, he had successfully avoided any direct contact with her. He kept his head down, worked his night shifts when she wasn't in the building, and on the rare occasions when their paths might have crossed, he found ways to be elsewhere. He had built his entire life around the principle of avoiding her, of never having to face the complicated tangle of emotions he felt about the woman who had been his best friend and his betrayer. But if he took this job, that careful avoidance would become impossible. They would be in the same building during the same hours. Eventually, inevitably, they would have to speak to each other. James got home to find Emma doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up at him with eyes that were too knowing, too aware, and he wondered again what had changed in her recently, why she seemed to be watching him so carefully. "How did it go?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "He offered me a job," James said, sitting down heavily. "A real job, senior systems architect. Good salary, everything we could possibly need. It would change our lives, Emma." He paused, then added quietly, "Your mother would tell me I'm an idiot if I don't take it." "Then take it, Daddy," Emma said, reaching across to squeeze his hand. "You deserve it. You've always deserved it." She took a deep breath, and James saw her gathering her courage for something. "And Daddy, there's something I need to tell you, something I did." Over the next 20 minutes, Emma told him everything, finding the photograph, confronting Victoria Sterling, learning the truth about the past 7 years, the plan to create opportunities that would lead him back to the work he was meant to do, the scholarship that wasn't entirely merit-based, the problem-solving initiative that had been designed specifically to reveal his talent. She told him about Victoria's guilt and her years of trying to help from a distance, about the woman's desperate desire to make amends for a choice she had made in fear and exhaustion. Emma spoke quickly, the words tumbling out, and James sat frozen in his chair, his face cycling through shock and disbelief and a complicated grief. When Emma finished, she pulled the photograph from her backpack and placed it on the table between them. "This is who you used to be," she said, her voice breaking. "This is who you still are, underneath all the guilt and the punishment you've been giving yourself. Victoria didn't steal your future, Daddy. You gave it away because you thought you didn't deserve it anymore. Because Mom died and you couldn't save her, and somehow you decided that meant you had to stop being brilliant. That's not what Mom would have wanted. She would have wanted you to keep building things, keep solving problems, keep being the person she fell in love with." James picked up the photograph with trembling hands. He hadn't looked at this image in 7 years, hadn't allowed himself to remember that young man with the bright eyes and the confident smile, standing beside his best friend in front of the dream they were building together. He and Victoria looked so happy in this picture, so full of hope and ambition and the innocent belief that their friendship could conquer anything. They had been wrong about that, he thought. Their friendship hadn't been strong enough to survive grief and fear and the crushing pressure of keeping a startup afloat. But maybe it didn't have to stay broken forever. "You shouldn't have done this," James said. But there was no real anger in his voice, just a weary resignation, and underneath it something that might have been relief. "This wasn't your burden to carry, Emma. My mistakes aren't yours to fix." "But I'm not fixing your mistakes," Emma said fiercely. "I'm fixing the story you've been telling yourself. The story that says you're a failure, that says you don't deserve good thing, that says you have to keep punishing yourself forever for being human." She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "Mom wouldn't want this for you. She wouldn't want you spending your life mopping floors and pretending. You're not brilliant just because you feel guilty for surviving when she didn't. And I don't want it either. I want you to be happy, Daddy. I want you to stop hurting yourself." James felt his own tears falling, hot and unbidden. He pulled Emma into his arms and held her as they both cried, releasing 7 years of suppressed grief and guilt and love. She was right, he realized. Sarah wouldn't have wanted this. His wife had always told him that his mind was a gift meant to be used, that hiding his light served no one. By punishing himself, by choosing invisibility and poverty and wasted potential, he hadn't been honoring her memory. He had been betraying it. When they finally pulled apart, James wiped his eyes and looked at the photograph again. "I need to talk to her," he said quietly, to Victoria. "We need to have the conversation we should have had 7 years ago. The honest one." where we both admit what we did wrong and why. Emma nodded. She's been waiting for that conversation. She's been waiting for 7 years. Over the next few days, James wrestled with his decision. He accepted Marcus Webb's job offer, giving notice to the custodial department and preparing for a transition that felt surreal in its speed. He would start his new position in 2 weeks, giving him time to process everything that had happened and to prepare for the inevitable encounter with Victoria Sterling. Emma enrolled at her new school, a prestigious private academy that represented opportunities she had never imagined having. Their lives were changing faster than either of them could fully comprehend, built on a foundation of truths that had been hidden and wounds that were finally beginning to heal. On his last day of custodial work, James found an envelope on his cart. It was simple white paper, sealed with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. James, it read, "I know what Emma did. I know you know the truth now. I'm sorry for so many things. Sorry for the choice I made 7 years ago. Sorry for not fighting harder to make you listen. Sorry for letting you punish yourself for so long. But I'm not sorry that Emma brought us back together, even if it was through manipulation and elaborate plans. She's remarkable. Just like her father. I would like to speak with you when you're ready, not as CEO to employee, as two old friends who lost their way and need to find their way back. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from the building, Calf Meridian. I'll be there this Saturday at 10 in the morning. I'll wait as long as it takes. Whether you come or not, please know that I never forgot what we built together, and I never stopped believing you were the best partner I could have asked for. With regret and hope, Victoria." Saturday morning arrived with clear blue skies and the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel like a new beginning. James stood outside Calf Meridian for a full 5 minutes before he could force himself to walk through the door. He had told Emma where he was going, and she had hugged him fiercely and told him to be brave, that some conversations were worth having even when they terrified you. Now, standing on the threshold, he wondered if he had the courage his daughter seemed to think he possessed. Victoria was sitting at a corner table, 2 cups of coffee already waiting. She looked different than he remembered, older obviously, but also softer somehow. The severe business armor she wore in her office was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was down around her shoulders and she looked nervous, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if drawing warmth from it. When she saw him, she stood up quickly, and for a moment they just stared at each other across the cafe. 2 people who had once known each other better than anyone and had become strangers. "James," she said quietly, and just hearing her say his name after 7 years of silence broke something open in his chest. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." He crossed to the table and sat down, accepting the coffee she pushed toward him. It was prepared exactly the way he liked it, 2 sugars and cream, and he realized she had remembered after all these years. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment, neither knowing how to begin the conversation that was 7 years overdue. Finally, Victoria spoke, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "I practiced what I was going to say 1,000 times. I had speeches prepared, explanations, justifications, but now that you're actually here, all of that feels inadequate. So I'm just going to tell you the truth. What I did to you was wrong. I took advantage of your grief and your desperation, and I told myself it was for your own good when really it was about protecting myself and the company. I was terrified and exhausted and resentful, and I made a choice that destroyed our friendship and derailed your life. I'm so sorry, James. I've been sorry every single day for 7 years. James looked down at his coffee, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. For so long he had imagined this conversation, imagined the accusations he would throw at her, the anger he would unleash. But sitting here now, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, hearing the pain in her voice, he found that his anger had burned out somewhere along the way. What remained was just sadness, a deep well of grief for what they had both lost. "I signed those papers," he said finally. "You didn't force me. I was drowning in medical bills and fear, and you offered me a way out. Part of me even understood, even then, that you were trying to survive too, that the company was everything to both of us, and you were trying to save it the only way you knew how." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But it still hurt, Victoria. It hurt that you didn't wait, that you didn't give me time to recover, to find my balance again. It hurt that when I needed my friend most, you chose the business instead." Victoria's tears were flowing freely now. I know it hurt you, and I've hated myself for it. After Sarah died, I tried to find you. I wanted to tell you that the company had succeeded, that your share would have been worth millions, that I wanted to make it right, but you had disappeared, and by the time I found you 3 years later, you had built walls so high I couldn't climb them. You wouldn't let me help. You wouldn't even let me apologize. James felt the old defenses rising, the familiar urge to retreat into his guilt and his self-imposed punishment. "Because accepting your help would have meant admitting that I had given away something valuable," he said, "that I had made the wrong choice, and I couldn't bear that admission. I had already failed Sarah, failed to save her or even make her comfortable in those last months. The idea that I had also failed myself, failed our dream, failed you, it was too much. So I convinced myself that I deserved to be a janitor, that mopping your floors was my penance for being weak when it mattered most." Victoria reached across the table and took his hand, and James didn't pull away. "You didn't fail Sarah," she said with fierce intensity. "You loved her with everything you had. You were present for every moment of her illness. You held her hand when she was frightened, and you made her laugh when she needed light. I watched you do it, James. I saw the kind of husband you were, the kind of father you became to Emma. You didn't fail. You survived an impossible situation, and the fact that you kept going, kept providing for your daughter, kept being kind and good even when you were broken inside. That's not failure, that's heroism. The words cracked something in James that had been frozen for 7 years. He had never allowed himself to believe that, had never given himself permission to see his survival as anything but inadequate. But hearing it from Victoria, from the person whose opinion had always mattered more than almost anyone, he felt the possibility of forgiveness beginning to stir. Not just forgiving her, but forgiving himself. "Emma told me what you've been doing," James said. "The anonymous help, the scholarships, making sure I had the best insurance, arranging for me to work here where you could watch over me. It was misguided and frustrating and also incredibly kind. You've been taking care of me for 7 years and I never even knew it." Victoria smiled through her tears. "I didn't know how else to help. You had made it clear you wanted nothing from me, so I had to find ways you wouldn't notice. And I brought you back to Sterling Industries not to torture you, but because I couldn't bear the thought of you being somewhere I couldn't keep you safe. I know it sounds controlling and probably a little crazy, but James, you were my best friend. Losing you was worse than any business failure could ever have been." They sat there holding hands across the table, two people who had been broken by their choices and by circumstances beyond their control, finally beginning to piece themselves back together. The conversation continued for hours, flowing from apologies to memories to laughter to more tears. They talked about Sarah and how much they both missed her wisdom and her warmth. They talked about Emma and how remarkable she was, how she had inherited the best qualities of both her parents. They talked about the business and how lonely success had been for Victoria without her partner there to share it. They talked about the years of silence and isolation and the walls they had both built to protect themselves from pain. By the time they left the cafe, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the street. James felt lighter than he had in 7 years, as if he had been carrying a boulder and had finally set it down. Victoria walked beside him and it felt natural, comfortable, like slipping back into an old familiar rhythm they had both thought was lost forever. When they reached the corner where they would part ways, Victoria stopped and turned to him. "Marcus Webb is one of my best hires," she said. "He's brilliant and kind, and he's going to be an excellent mentor to you as you transition back into this work. But James, I want you to know that eventually, when you're ready, there's a place for you beyond innovation and development. There's a place for you as my partner again, not in the way we were before, but in a new way. We're older now, wiser, and we've both learned hard lessons about what matters. I think we could build something remarkable together if you'd be willing to try." James felt his breath catch. The idea was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. "Maybe," he said. "Let me find my feet first. Let me remember who I am at this work. But Victoria, I'd like to try being friends again. Real friends, not just former partners with a painful history. I'd like Emma to know you, to understand that the woman who gave her a scholarship is someone who matters to our family." "I'd like that too," Victoria said, her voice warm with hope. "More than you know." They said goodbye with a hug that lasted longer than either intended, a gesture of forgiveness and possibility in the tentative beginning of healing. As James walked home, he pulled out his phone and looked at the photo Emma had sent him, the one of the two young people standing in front of their storefront full of dreams and hope. He had spent 7 years seeing that photo as a reminder of failure, but now he saw it differently. It was a reminder that second chances were possible, that broken things could be mended, and that sometimes the best way to honor the past was to build a new future. When he got home, Emma was waiting for him, anxiety written all over her face. "How did it go, Daddy? Did you talk to her? Really talk?" James pulled his daughter into a hug, holding her tight. "We talked, we cried, we remembered, and we forgave. And Emma, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to do what I couldn't do. Thank you for believing that broken things could be fixed and that people deserved second chances. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, and I will spend the rest of my life being worthy of that gift." Emma hugged him back, her face pressed against his chest, and she felt a profound sense of peace. She had set out to expose a villain and had discovered instead that the world was more complicated than childhood certainties allowed. She had learned that people made mistakes out of fear and exhaustion, that guilt could be as imprisoning as any physical cage, and that forgiveness was not about forgetting but about choosing to move forward unburdened by the weight of the past. Most importantly, she had learned that sometimes love meant taking risks, telling difficult truths, and forcing the people you cared about to face the parts of themselves they had been hiding from. 2 years later, James Chun stood once again in front of a storefront, but this time it was different. The sign above the door read Sterling Chun Innovation Labs, and beside him stood Victoria, both of them older and wiser and ready to try again. Emma, now 12 and thriving at her new school, took the photograph that would commemorate this moment. When she looked at the image on her phone, she saw her father smiling with genuine joy, his eyes bright with purpose and possibility. Victoria stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, partners once again, but this time built on a foundation of honesty and hard-won forgiveness. Emma saved the photo, placing it next to the old one in her collection. A before and after that told the story of redemption, of second chances, and of a little girl who believed that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was show someone a photograph and ask them if they remembered who they used to be.